Yujizi suddenly had a feeling that she might be able to advance further on this path of the 5 techniques. After much thought, she made a surprising decision in her heart. In an instant, all the gloom was swept away by Schwer's strong presence. Tianyang happily lifted the little guy up. Amid the cheers of the crowd, they overcame the greatest crisis in the history of Wufeng village. As she watched the young man, content in the village, Su'er feared that this was all just a dream. He was afraid he would shatter it himself. But after seeing the little guy safe and sound, the brothers almost simultaneously cheered with joy. Jill Mei tightly embraced the old demon, crying tears of joy. He was like this back then too, realizing that this was my limit. With Yujizi collapsing and not getting up, both the Righteous Alliance and the people of 5 Peaks village were already stunned. For a long time, Tianyang gently called out, and Su'er, facing the sunlight, turned and told Yukiko, "He is Lu Su'er, the old wife of the 5 Peaks village." Upon hearing this, the old man finally revealed a bitter smile. The long sword in his hand slowly slipped to the ground. "You've lost." Meanwhile, Yukiko was completely stunned, yet felt helpless. She just stood there quietly. After a while, she struggled to ask, "Can you tell me your name?" He wants to see this second move. But Su'er has already noticed the old man's condition. This time, he did not use the 9 Heavens sword technique again. After wounding his left shoulder, he spoke calmly, "Old man, he has no strength left to fight." A mouthful of blood oozes from the corner of his mouth. Yet, relying on his own will, he raises his sword again. He wants to confront it with one more strike, even if it means falling here. The entire valley was left with terrifying 3 claw marks. The sword Sex Tai Chi behind Yujizi, who has yet to steady himself, is already in tatters. At this moment, he is like a spent arrow. His inner strength is exhausted. Facing the second sword attack from the youth, after more than a decade of stagnation in his cultivation, he has such an opportunity. The outcome of this battle has already become unimportant to him. The Heavenly Emperor sword sect has instantly drained all of its inner strength. It collided with this unparalleled sword technique. Happy to be able to fight him again, he is also very scared. Scared of this power that the entire martial world cannot contend with. But he is also very fortunate. Fortunate to be so lucky. This is the signature technique of the 9 Heavens Sword Saint. He no longer underestimates Su'er in the slightest. This move in the young man's hand has left a shadow in the hearts of countless heroes. And that includes Yuji herself. He is so happy. This was a memory that had always lingered in the old man's heart. 25 years ago, he experienced helplessness in front of this golden dragon soul. Now, as if by some strange fate, he encounters the young man again. The figure from the past gradually overlaps with the present one. At this moment, he finally knows who he is truly up against. Yuji looked on in disbelief at this terrifying yet familiar scene. Before him was a golden true dragon. It gazed down at him with eyes that looked down upon the world. Beneath the golden dragon, the dragon roams freely. It seems the young man has already perished. However, before he could feel regret, he suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Before him, golden light burst forth from the swirling dust. Among it, a pair of even brighter eyes were staring fixedly at him. Everyone was terrified and nearly got swept into it. But the dazzling light made it impossible for them to look directly at it. Once the impact ended, Yuji Jinren showed no signs of joy. This move is the pinnacle technique of Wudang. He pointed the blade at the boy. At that moment, Su'er felt as if the sky was collapsing and the earth was splitting. It was extremely difficult to maintain his balance. But there was no time to react. A massive beam of light struck the ground. By this time, the companions had also arrived. Watching the unbelievable scene before them, a gasp erupted almost simultaneously. The old man conjured an enormous taiji diagram in midair, with a swing of his sword. But now there isn't much of a good solution. I think it's better to maintain a distance and plan ahead. Just as Su'er was contemplating a strategy, the other side launched a surprise attack with a sword energy. Then, unexpectedly, they chose to leap into the air. Not a single word came out. At that moment, Su'er had already leaped back. He maintained a considerable distance from the opponent. The young man understood that he had overstepped too much. Actively closing in seems to play right into the other person's hands. He immediately turned around to block this seemingly slow yet lightning-fast attack. But in the end, it was a step too slow. It was struck by a sword from Yujia. This anger made Tianyang and Lao Si break into a cold sweat at almost the same time. But it felt like something was blocking their throats. He instead received a wound to his left arm from a sword. After staggering to regain his balance, he lost sight of his opponent. As a sense of pressure approached from behind, Su'er felt something was wrong in his heart. I can't discern the depth of this world. I can only rush forward to test it myself. I see the old man spread his arms. Just as the young man was about to strike him, It felt as if time and space were out of alignment. But it seems the other party really doesn't take me seriously. This is why this world was created. The Tai Chi Bagua behind the sword sect moves almost at will, but Su-er doesn't have much combat experience. She couldn't help but start to suspect if he really was a disciple of the heaven-shattering demon lord. But when she asked, the young man simply pointed his sword to the sky, saying his martial arts came from the heavens above. At this moment, Yuheim still couldn't grasp its deeper meaning. Seeing that Su-er was evenly matched with the opponent, they knew that this was not a situation they could intervene in, taking the leader away to a distant place. After a brief clash, Yuheim became even more surprised. This thoroughly infuriated the nearly legendary Yujie Jinren. However, despite the youth's arrogance, Yujie could never gain the upper hand. After the above moves, at this moment, the fourth brother and the others also rushed over. The moment he saw Su-er, he realized those other disciples were worlds apart by comparison. But at this moment, despite Su-er's serious expression, he didn't feel that he would lose at all. He still claims to be more formidable than him. And that's also because she tirelessly teaches others. Anyone with exceptional talent that reached his ears, if there was a chance, he would take them as his disciple. Though now he has fled far away, and the moment he saw Su-er, he already had an intense desire for wealth. Moreover, the young man's extremely abnormal inner strength made it hard to bear ending it at this time. Yuji is famously protective of her students in the Wudang sect. He revealed the first sword technique of Wudang. The Tai Chi sword gazed at the youth, yet he smiled and asked, "Do you still think you are stronger than me?" I originally just wanted him to retreat upon realizing the difficulty. After all, even the Heavenly Emperor sword sect cannot control its power at will. The sword technique of the Heavenly Sword sect pressed forward like a solid form. In the old man's eyes, he had never seen such a fearless junior. He actually believed he could surpass him. In a fit of rage, although Su-er barely stabilized his stance, it seemed he also realized some things. He could truly sense the opponent's power. But I should be stronger than him. The young man faced the sword saint of Wudang. Yuji realized that the boy's inner strength was a bit too exaggerated. She no longer had time to worry about the petty characters. The two stood together. Just for a moment, the young man was struck and sent flying by a sword. At that moment, she had only one thought. No one can hurt her elder brother. But the opponents simply changed tactics. They easily deflected Su-er's invincible sword energy far away. With the explosion of the mountain behind, Schwer saw the situation was bad, and instantly stomped the ground, infusing energy into his blade, and slashed a wave of sword energy at Master Yuji. The fear and unease from before turned to ashes in an instant, before a large hole was blasted into the wall by the impact from both sides. At the same time, Master Yuji landed on one foot, and immediately appeared in front of the falling Tianyang, with her sword in hand. But at that moment, Su-er inside the wall sensed something was wrong. He immediately let out a similar roar, charging with Xian Nu's true energy to block the attack. In just an instant, Tianyang had no time to react. The master slowly walked forward from behind him. Although I told you not to be impulsive, I also can't let this unreasonable guy tarnish my name. A furious roar, infused with an immense amount of pure inner strength, surged upward towards the sky. He doesn't dare to come here and make trouble himself. Do you think we would be afraid just because you brought that decrepit old man? A round of mockery. The boss felt a chill run down his spine. Sure enough, no matter who the opponent was, it was his duty to stand in front of everyone. While the boss of the Righteous Path Alliance, Sang, was still mocking how this minor character dared to show up, Tianyang sneered ominously. Sang Huiran, you pitiful fool. Before Schwer could react, he suddenly leaped onto the wall. Even though he knew how terrifying the other party was, he still told Su-er that he was the boss. But Tianyang was already sweating profusely. At this moment, Schwer finally felt much lighter in her heart. However, the sound of many footsteps approaching from outside the village soon followed. The noise stopped only at the outer wall. Tianyang knew that the battle was about to begin. Indeed, no matter how many thoughts or anxieties, they can't compare to a good, exhilarating fight. So Su-er put away her technique, and with her small frame, engaged her big brother in combat. It was the cold of spring. He drew his blade saw and attacked Su-er. Since you can't sleep, let your big brother help you stretch out a bit. At first, Su-er was startled, but then a smile appeared on her face. As expected, the little guy, with panda eyes, was still awkwardly saying he couldn't sleep. Tian gazed at such a Su-er. He knew words wouldn't help. He knew that everyone had been too reliant on Su-er. But no matter how capable the little guy was, he was still just a child. And this time, the opponent was one that even a medium-level sect wouldn't dare to confront. And the pressure on a young boy like this How could I possibly feel at ease? But at that moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind him. He was instantly startled. He thought to himself that he had been too careless. He immediately swung the blade in his hand toward the newcomer. But when he saw clearly, he found it was his older brother, Pang Tianyao. Forcing himself to immerse in the sea of stones, tempering himself. The opponent's great reputation tightened his heart even more. Though just as tired as his sworn brothers, he didn't feel the slightest hint of drowsiness. But he doesn't believe he can triumph against someone who is a master of the martial world. When the brothers fell asleep, the little guy sneaked to the front of the camp, as if hoping for even the slightest bit of progress. His life has never been as happy as it is now, even though an insurmountable deadlock is about to come. He really can't let his brothers know how uncertain he feels when facing Yu Jizhenren. The Nine Heavens sword technique is indeed profound. At this time, hundreds of people in the city followed the cloaked Yu Jizhenren towards Wufeng Mountain. We'll soon meet my previous auspicious sign. Wufeng Zhai will face disaster. Friendship even in death, fragrant in the canyon. For Su'er, everyone could still feel each other's warmth in this moment. I don't even understand what this emotion is, but he really hopes this moment could last forever. However, no one rested all night. Before they knew it, they talked until dawn. Since that's the case, from today on, we're all family. I'll be counting on all of you from now on. This scene made Schwer feel especially amazed. Even though we might not survive past tomorrow, how about we swear brotherhood here? Let's become family, like brothers of the same clan. That way, there's no need for anyone to be grateful to anyone else. Isn't that so? Chongshan and Hume were still looking surprised by the words. But Tianyang burst out laughing instead. His trust in himself deeply moved him. This affected anger was a bit excessive. Even Jume couldn't bear it anymore. She suddenly spoke up and said, since we're all in this together now, let's not be so petty, boss. Everyone sat around the fire discussing how to prevent a surprise attack. We still need to take turns keeping watch. However, Tianyang couldn't hold back in the end, and expressed his gratitude to the brothers. Since that's the case, let's all take a risk together. What does this so-called deadlock matter? With the help of my brothers for a while, we quickly set the wall up again. Just like Su'er said, this is their home. Leaving Wufeng village, they have nowhere to go. Thinking of this, Tianyang no longer acted coy. He didn't realize they were mocking him at all. Instead, he let out a bitter smile. He knew he wasn't facing this hopeless situation alone anymore, but he also knew there was a good chance they would all die together. He just understands everyone's feelings. Now you can't handle it, can you? It was only then that he realized everyone was here. At that moment, the third brother seemed to seize the chance to mock him. Big brother, you didn't really think we would leave, did you? Tian looked up at the scene for a long time, and it fell straight towards the sun. But at that moment, he had no strength left. Just when he thought he would be crushed to death, the fourth brother suddenly appeared before him. Smiling, he said, I told you to work properly usually. He hurriedly built a new curtain wall all by himself. Looking at his trembling hands, he realized it had indeed been too long since he last did any work himself. It has always been everyone. Suddenly, the curtain wall's rope snapped. No one could believe what their leader was saying. But fourth brother seemed to understand what he was thinking. He didn't say anything. He just led Schwer and the others out of the assembly hall. And the always cheerful and rough man, Pang Tianyang, stood there with a gloomy expression, staring into the fire. What if she dies at the hands of that Yu Jizhenren? Wouldn't I regret it for the rest of my life? Thinking of this, he quietly sighed. The sergeant announced that Wufeng village would disband on the spot. Everyone, who had just regained confidence thanks to Su'er's words, was suddenly stunned, and he still felt anxious inside. He wasn't wrong. We've been relying too much on Schwer. And this time, the enemy is far too powerful. Schwer is so young. Su'er meant that if the Jade Princess didn't harm people with her flying leaves and flowers, then what reason would there be not to give it a try? The brothers had great confidence in Su'er's strength. Everyone seemed to feel much more at ease for a moment. But Pang Tianyang remembered what old Morong had said. No matter how strong the opponent is, it must never be taken away by anyone. Wufeng village is finished. It completely disbanded under this man's decision. Originally, after most people had left, of leaves that floated in the wind to the eaves, it slowly fell into Su'er's hands. He didn't know how he compared to that Yu Jizhenren. But at this moment, he was the only one who could give it his all. Moreover, in his heart, this was the only path home. Moreover, those children should still have hope to return here. Thinking of this, he felt that he was a useless creditor. He slammed his fist hard on the armrest of the chair. This action knocked off several pieces. Aside from Su'er and their original 7 brothers, there were also Chongshan, Jume, and Hume. At this time, Tianyang revealed a bitter smile. I apologized to everyone with a sense of shame. But he couldn't bear to leave the village. But although he was afraid in his heart, seeing that Jomei had no intention of leaving, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He was reluctant to leave. Before long, only 10 people remained in the hall. Watching this scene, the people in the village gradually began to follow Murong and leave. But surprisingly, Chongshan firmly stated that he would stay in the village. No matter how his friends persuaded him, he remained unwavering. Only with luck can we survive this. His words grew more and more agitated. It seems that he wants to cover up the turmoil in his heart by spreading fear. That's all there is to say. He turned around and left the village without looking back. Can easily deal with a street thug like me. And now he's here in person. This is not something that can be solved with tricks or cleverness. The only option now is to flee from the stronghold. If we scatter, there's a chance we won't be found. The words he spoke held not a shred of hope. In his view, Wufeng village was finished. Yujiu was the strongest master in the current Wudang sect, even his inner disciples. Meanwhile, the others were waiting in the gathering hall for him to take charge of the situation. But in this situation, his footsteps seemed particularly heavy. After a while, the people in the hall indeed appeared very flustered. Among them, the old man Murong understood best what the words Yujiu Zhenren represented. And such a big figure actually came personally to lead the team. Facing the overwhelming sense of oppression, Tian Yang appeared very powerless and weary in front of his younger brother. He had already let the women and children go back to pack their bags. To avoid the trouble for now, he didn't even turn when he heard Suer's voice. His tone carried fear, unwillingness, and helplessness, as he told them that the real Jade Fairy would lead an attack on Wufeng village tomorrow. That is a super big shot, second only to the top 10 masters in the martial world. But I didn't expect that the president of the Zhengzhou Jingdao Alliance branch is a disciple of Yu Ji. The mantra taught to them will naturally be the same as his. Seeing that it was getting late, the three of them, chatting and laughing, decided to head back to the village. However, they did not notice how unusually quiet the village had become. Meanwhile, their eldest brother Tian Yang stood alone in front of the village, showing no emotion. They were overwhelmed with excitement. Without even checking if she understood the situation, they rushed over and babbled nonsense. The little one blushed with embarrassment. Facing their starry-eyed expressions, she said, "Just keep practicing." We're astonished to see 5 lotus flowers appearing above his head gradually blooming. They revealed a golden radiance. At this point, Suer finally mastered the techniques in the Xian Nu mirror. As she opened her eyes again, the 5 golden lotuses scattered with the wind. The two of them gazed at Suer, now looking like an immortal. Since escaping the old warehouse, Suer has made no further progress. He recalls the time spent practicing swordplay with the figure in the mirror. No matter how he practiced in the past, it seemed only suitable for assassination. But at this moment, he could no longer distinguish between the two. Meanwhile, the two observing Suer's cultivation. It loomed over everyone's heart like a catastrophe. The young man was immersed in the sea of the world, following the 9 heavens sword technique. Originally, there were still some unspoken difficulties, yet he gained insights while guiding others to rest. At that moment, he was actually hovering off the ground. The mind was completely immersed in a realm of imagination. He resolutely wielded the 9 heavens sword technique thousands of times. But what they did not know was, a terrifying piece of news suddenly spread through the village. She felt as if she had just woken up from a nap. She was in high spirits. But the scene before her left her stunned. While reminding the newly awakened Hame to be quiet, she stared at the boy in front of her, lost in concentration. The boy was also seeing someone else practice for the first time. It was as if some blurry things from before became clear. Feeling inspired, he too began to work on his own heart-mind techniques and formulas. Dusk. Jomei groggily opened her eyes. It's not a difficult task. It just takes 10 years of focused practice to master it. But no matter how they heard it, it didn't sound encouraging to them. They had to first follow Suer's instructions to calm their minds. Gradually, they became fully immersed in it. At this moment, Suer was instructing Jomei and Hame in martial arts. He was teaching them the 9 heavens heart method through both words and actions. However, the complicated formulas made it difficult for them to remember even 3 sentences. They appeared quite distressed for a moment, but in Suer's eyes. But they also invited the best carpenter from the nearby town to build a hall for gathering. But now, looking at those happy children, Tian Yang fell into silence. Under the inquiry of the 4th brother, he merely said he was reminded of some things from the past. It seems that I must have significant gains in this line of work. But now in Wufeng village, everyone is almost completely immersed in the illusion of being invincible. At this moment, the speed of the village's expansion is faster than the imperial army's conscription. Not only have they taken in a group of long oppressed women and children, Jia Zhenren no longer hesitated. However, he unexpectedly expressed a desire to go in person. He said he would go to Nanshan Temple on the mountain every day to offer a divination. But for all these years, there had never been any sign of good or bad fortune. And today, I unexpectedly drew the best lot. At that point, the imperial court may intervene. I'm afraid that various factions in the martial world will exert influence in the southern city. Considering numerous factors, it has troubled the junior brother to mobilize troops. After learning the thoughts of the sect leader, nearly overthrew the entire martial world. Who can guarantee that such an event won't happen again? Moreover, we can no longer rely on the two guardians. If we go to war with the Dear Spirit Alliance now, countless lives will be lost, and the entire martial world could fall into unprecedented weakness. But since he was within the Dear Spirit Alliance, it was best to eliminate him early. Moreover, what worried him more was, though the Dear Spirit Alliance is no longer as powerful as the demon sect once ruled by Moon Demon. Back then, Moon Demon single-handedly. But at this moment, the sect leader suddenly appeared extremely wise. In his eyes, he had already seen through the matter. He knew that a young man who rose to prominence in such a way, could never be the disciple of that demon lord. In his view, among the 10 top masters today, 9 are in the Jingdao Alliance. If a war really breaks out, would they still fear a mere demon lord? But funnily enough, the person in charge of the Zhengzhou branch is actually an outer disciple of this junior brother Yuji. If he sends an inner disciple to handle it, it would be the most reasonable approach. This matter left Yuji quite puzzled. Has always been maintained by an extremely fragile balance. If the matter really involves that heaven-shattering demon lord, things will become drastically different. If it's not handled properly, I'm afraid the two major forces will go to war over it. Was a red-haired boy suspected to be a disciple of the Devil Master? Initially, it was just an ordinary request for help, but this matter seemed extremely sensitive in the leader's hands. He summoned his junior brother Yuji to discuss the issue. It turns out the relationship between the Jingdao Alliance and the Luling Alliance. Just a few days ago, the leader of the Wudang sect received a letter from the Zhengzhou branch of the Orthodox Alliance. It mentioned that around Wufeng Mountain, all outposts within the alliance were inaccessible. What blocked their way? It really did bring him such good luck. This is an old man named Shuang, nearly a martial arts master. He received an auspicious fortune at Nanshan Temple. He traveled far to Zhengzhou. He planned to meet the young man rumored to be at Wufeng Mountain. If he had such an exceptional disciple, he would definitely be showing him off to the world. How could he be hidden away in this small Wufeng Mountain? At this thought, he felt like he'd struck gold. The auspicious fortune he got from Nanshan Temple turned out to be true. Jiu Mei revealed a triumphant expression of having succeeded in her scheme. She indicated that as long as he taught her and Hame martial arts, he could handle everything for Su Er. At that moment, the departing Master Yuji told this perplexed foolish disciple that the young man could not possibly be a disciple of the Broken Sky Demon Lord. Jiu Mei pressed further, saying the brothers in the village were hoping to bring back some cured meat, but that plan had fallen through too. Finally, the boy couldn't take it anymore. Timidly, he asked Jiu Mei if there was any way to fix the situation. He was willing to do anything, no matter what. Seeing that Su Er had taken the bait, she also expressed that Si Go had specifically reminded her not to cause trouble for the sake of expanding the village. Seeing Su Er becoming increasingly flustered, Jiu Mei immediately told him again. Hame had been eagerly looking forward to buying a new set of clothes on this trip down the mountain, and even covered Hame's mouth to stop her from denying it. They were angrily complaining that Su Er had caused too much damage. They longed for the boy's seemingly awkward and helpless expression. Suddenly, Jiu Mei had an idea. She took out the coins that Si Go had given her. While saying that this little amount of money wasn't enough to compensate the tavern, she turned and was about to leave, while Su Er watched the old man's back. He was utterly confused inside. What exactly was this feeling? At this moment, the two sisters, Jiu Mei, walked out of the terrifying cave. He recalled the battle with Li Fugue that day. He saw everything clearly from afar. He would never mistake this person. He immediately shouted to the master, "It's him." But Master Yuji completely ignored his words. The aura emanating from this old man felt extremely ominous. It made him feel a sense of impending danger. At this moment, Boss Sang also arrived at the scene. He immediately spotted the red-haired boy from Wufeng Mountain. Though he didn't know why he appeared in Zhengzhou, the youth's aura appeared extremely pure and refined. He certainly did not believe that the other possessed unparalleled swordsmanship. This thing seems to be an extremely excellent martial arts tool. But in Su Er's eyes, the red-haired youth suddenly appeared before him. At the same time, the youth noticed his gaze. In the moment they locked eyes, both had formed some judgments in their hearts. In the eyes of the Jade Fairy, he finally realized there was no escaping this ordeal. Compared to dealing with Wufeng Mountain, He would rather serve the master dutifully afterward to seek forgiveness. But at that moment, the wall of the inn beside real Jade Mistress was suddenly smashed through by a burly man. But more than that, he was afraid. What would his master think? He could see the master striding forward without turning back. At first, he still naively thought the master hadn't heard him. But from afar, a voice calmly came, instructing him to return to Wudang Mountain for seclusion afterward. He is afraid of losing his own reputation. So he invited a master who had once ranked among the top 10 martial artists. Isn't this overkill? As people in the alleys kept talking, they grew more excited. Although Boss Sang was angry listening to them, he felt these people had no idea what they were talking about. This news spread not only in Zhengzhou, but even Wudang Mountain had already heard it. The gossip was rampant all along the way. The president of the Righteous Alliance's branch was feeling helpless and dejected. Seeing that Li Fugui can't even defeat others, she unexpectedly encountered Elder Yu Ji from Wudang. Upon learning that he had arrived in Zhengzhou, Brother Sang hurried to the west of the city to welcome him. But he didn't show any good attitude towards this useless apprentice. A mountain bandit had to specially invite him to handle this. That the two people who shouldn't have met now, unexpectedly encountered each other in such a farce. The simple and cheerful girl set a trap for the boy. In order to help her little sister escape the awkward situation of being forced into marriage by a rogue, Su Er didn't hold back and kicked the opponent out of the tavern. There should have been many plates shattering as well. But a cloaked man stamped his foot, and controlled it all. At this moment, Su Er finally sensed that there was an extremely unusual old man beside him. What they didn't know was, "So you haven't left yet." Before he could even begin to explain, he was kicked out by Su Er. He forcibly opened a side door to the inn. But aside from the sound of the broken wall, that they were from Wufeng village, and the one across from her is our 7th chief. Hearing this, a thunderbolt suddenly struck his mind. The young man across had already slowly stood up, and counted to the last number. He still maintains his composure for the girl's sake. He coldly remarks, "Haven't you heard of Hechia village's pot dishes? Which little kid are you from?" While nibbling on a big soup dumpling that might soon be gone, Jiao Mei told this silly rogue, disappearing right before his eyes. The bald man still hasn't realized the severity of the situation. He only finds it amusing to be threatened by a teenager. But he is indeed somewhat infatuated with the girl. Although extremely displeased, right in front of everyone, he places his hand on Humei's shoulder. Sweet words keep flowing from his mouth. At this moment, a boy's voice suddenly comes from the side. Considering today's good mood, give him 10 seconds to count. Now, is there anyone in both the underworld and the authorities in Hunan who doesn't know our 7th boss? Kind words of advice. Tell him to get lost quickly. Don't wait until you lose your life and regret it. But this rogue seems to have not heard at all. But Sister 9 seemed completely speechless. She herself had once been sold to a brothel. She escaped to the village. She knew exactly what filthy thoughts this brute had. But he was really clueless. He saw the group and seemed extremely pleased. He slowly walked behind the two women. Then he spoke to Humei in a sinister tone. "Do you know how worried I was about you?" Humei realized it was the thug who was forcing her into marriage. She was so scared that she broke into a cold sweat. "I want to see how much longer this little thief can keep jumping around." Meanwhile, these few people, enjoying their happy time, are naturally unaware. But just at this moment, a bald, burly man suddenly walked in from the 9th floor. Although he is not the most powerful elder in Wudang, he is among the top 10 masters in the martial world. Moreover, he is very protective of his disciples. When his disciples are in trouble, he should be arriving in Zhengzhou soon. If the news that the Zhengdao Alliance plans to bypass the bandit camp spreads, it would be even more embarrassing than being robbed by the bandits. Seeing that everyone had woken up, Master Sang finally had someone prepare the Longjing tea he brought back from West Lake. He had sent it to his master a month ago. Some have even suggested to bypass Wufeng Mountain while escorting. Hearing this, Minister Zheng of Zhengzhou was so angry that his scalp felt numb. He smashed a case in front of several people with a punch. Looking at Boss Sang and his bloodied fist, the others finally realized they had spoken out of turn. That red-haired boy is as strong as a monster. If he's a disciple of the Demon Lord of Destruction, then all of this would make sense. The more they talk, the more convinced they are that their guess is right. Given the Demon Lord's intimidation, they were more like famous escort agencies providing services for local business associations. If this continues, I'm afraid the Alliance of Justice will lose all its reputation in the Hunan capital. Expanding their influence will be as hard as climbing to the sky. And the people in the Zhengzhou branch are even starting to speculate. Eat until you can't eat anymore. Play until you can't move before returning to the village. But some are happy while others are worried. The righteous path has nearly all the strongholds around Wufeng Mountain falling into that young man's hands. These places were originally set up by various sects and families across the country. And Ha-mei is famous in the village for being sweet and lovely. She escaped to the mountain stronghold after being forced into marriage by thugs. Luckily, ninth sister rescued her and brought her back to help out. The fourth master specifically took a pouch of money for him, saying that he must take you out to relax. He doesn't understand why they suddenly need to stroll around the city so extravagantly. Just looking at this top restaurant in Zhengzhou, it's not something he and his sworn brothers could have touched in their poor past. Upon hearing this, ninth sister got excited. Seventh brother's patrols over the past month have made the entire village extremely prosperous. The expansion in personnel is nothing like before. Since his downfall, he had been humiliated constantly, and even his close family paid him no attention at all. Although the brothers in the village showed him great care, the young man had never experienced such open admiration from the girls. For a moment, he could only change the subject. They are the pinnacle of beauty among the female bandits, yet they all compete to be the young master's personal maid. Even Ha-mei, who had just joined the village, had long admired her from afar. The bright, shiny new clothes that Su'er was wearing were carefully selected, but at this moment, the young man, surrounded by attention, looked particularly awkward. The fire had already made him even more admired. Only a few brothers were more concerned about whether he was hurt. Upon learning that the little guy was fine, the next day, Yang gave Su'er a smack on the head. How could you destroy the wooden wall that everyone worked so hard to build? There was really no reason to kill him. However, everything in this scene was unknowingly witnessed by an unknown spy from a distance. For a moment, he found it hard to believe what he had just seen. After a long silence, he disappeared from the cliff without a trace. When Su'er returned to the village, and declared that he would never go near Wufeng village again, afraid that the other party wouldn't believe him, he even swore a poisonous oath. After thinking for a moment, the blood child allowed him to leave with his people. In his eyes, this person was too weak. This statement caused Li Fugue, lying on the ground, to spit out another mouthful of fresh blood. He didn't know what kind of monster this was, but upon hearing the other person say they were going to cut his throat, he was so scared that he lost all his arrogance. He begged the young hero to spare him. He didn't understand why all the opponent's afterimages seemed like the real body, or how just one glance allowed him to surpass himself. And Schwer looked at the invader boy she had crippled in an instant. He was complaining without restraint that he hadn't finished his performance yet. But the other party collapsed. Kellen faced the enemy. He didn't even have time to be shocked. Focusing his mind, he searched for the boy's real body. But in the next moment, he completely lost his ability to fight. This was also his source of pride all along. However, all of this quickly vanished. In the changes of Su'er's sword techniques, the young man merely watched him demonstrate once, and then executed the exact same move. But among this generation of disciples, he is the only one who has grasped its profound mysteries. But coincidentally, he was just an outer disciple. After returning to Hunan, he quickly became the top expert here. He even started mimicking the opponent's stance. Seeing this, Li Fugue was quite surprised. But he didn't realize how terrifying the opponent truly was. In his view, this 13 winds of Qingfeng may be the prerequisite skill for Huashan's Plum Blossom Divine Sword. At that moment, he realized that aside from his real body, they were all just afterimages. This was only after the reminder from the little bald head last night. Su'er has already developed a great interest in martial arts. Suddenly, Li Fugue's figure trembled in midair. He unexpectedly created 4 identical illusions of himself, each moving differently. They all attacked towards the Su family, but the young man seized the moment. With one strike, he blocked all the attacks. Made him so angry his teeth were grinding. The little bit of calm he had just regained was once again thrown into madness as he drew out his weapon and charged at Su Ergong. He raised his hand and unleashed his most proud and famous technique, Clear Wind of the 13th generation. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. However, Su'er didn't care about his many thoughts. Causing trouble on one's own territory comes at a cost. So when are we going to start fighting? Hearing this, seeing the young man unyielding, he felt a headache. Although he didn't know the other's depth, just based on that one lamp, it definitely wouldn't be simple. But Li Fugue's pride made it impossible for him to gather over 100 people to hunt a kid. Schwer had already come to believe that Wufeng Mountain was their private property. No one was killed. They just collected some toll money, which was well deserved. So at this moment, facing the seemingly righteous Li Fugue, his young mind had already regarded the other as a dead man. He is increasingly becoming like a demonic cultivator. Yet within the alliance of righteousness is his flesh and blood and, by Yujin, Mu Donglai, who intended to eliminate his true self completely, and Li Fuke, who took advantage of the situation to raid his own fortress. Under the guidance of their elder brother Pang Tianyang, his entire palm and wrist were almost unable to grip anymore after that brief clash. Husband Li Fugue stared at the slowly approaching youth. He felt an overwhelming sense of unreality. This person was like a monster crawling out of hell. Now, Suer's fate is uncertain. A young man appeared out of nowhere, and slashed at him with a blade. Although he reacted immediately, their weapons clashed for just a moment, but the blow from the young man brought him a massive shock. How could he have left 100 people standing outside the village all night? But the fact that he didn't even enter the camp will likely become a laughingstock in the alliance of righteous paths. Just as he was forcing his way through, suddenly, the curtain wall exploded from the inside out, not stingy at all, as he started smashing furiously. In his mind, which was still somewhat functional, there was only one thought: to destroy this curtain wall as fast as possible. Otherwise, with all the effort he'd brought, making a fire and bringing over so much knowledge. Just then, Suer slowly walked forward with a broad knife. The crowd momentarily didn't know what this seventh leader was planning to do, but the murderous intent he exuded made everyone present too afraid to voice their questions. But by this time, Li Fugue had already reached Mu Chang, and he wasn't stingy. At this moment, the old man Murong in the village saw Li Fugue through the crack in the wall. The expression on his face was extremely unpleasant. He knew how formidable the opponent was. The curtain wall would definitely be completely breached under his axe in no time. He immediately shouted for his brothers to take out their bows and arrows to block him from breaking through the wall. However, the two younger brothers behind him were even more terrified at the sight. Although this division chief is young and capable, his mindset is a bit too arrogant. If this matter is exposed within the station, even if his martial arts are high, he will still be in danger. How could he, the esteemed Li Fugue, be a pillar of the righteous alliance? But the plan was ruined by a group of wild mountain men. Left with no choice, he had to force himself to say that everything was still under control. So, one man with an axe slowly walked towards the curtain wall. His expression instantly froze on the spot. He gazed at the tall wooden wall more than 100 meters away inside the gate. He only felt a burning sensation on his face, and his whole body trembled with anger. It was as if he could already hear the mocking and whispering of the group of swordsmen behind him. After the fire died down overnight, the men outside already showed a look of certain victory. When they used their claws to destroy the now fragile and weak resin wood, the younger one beside them seized the chance to flatter constantly. But when he looked up, everyone truly realized the chief's courage and wisdom. Without saying a word, they picked up their tools and quickly built the second line of defense. But at this moment, Suer didn't seem to know what he was thinking. His face looked especially grim. If we rush out recklessly now, we'll only fall into the enemy's trap. After a moment of quick thinking, he immediately instructed the brothers to build a second wall with corpses and wood in a safe area. After soaking the surroundings with water to prevent the fire from spreading, the sight instantly sobered him up. He knew that Dicky wasn't the real threat. Keeping his brothers calm was the top priority. He shouted without hesitation, "Everyone, don't panic just yet." When he looked back, he saw swordsmen engulfed in flames flooding into the village. The crowd descended into chaos in an instant. Tianyang, who was fast asleep, heard the commotion. With panda eyes, he opened the door to check. However, apart from external release, he didn't know any other ways to utilize internal energy. For a moment, he was quite troubled. Just as he was lost in thought, a cry of surprise came from behind him. Although his face still bore the mark of the pimple from being beaten by him, the flattery he gave was more impressive with each passing moment. But when he talked about some advanced internal techniques, Luzi Feihua Zhai, even leaves can hurt people, it greatly piqued Suer's interest. Although my wife unexpectedly obtained an unparalleled sword technique in the abandoned warehouse, she respects these 6 brothers, who treat her as their own, more than anyone else. Liao Qiaochun has been unstoppable because his wife is in charge. The village now seems very peaceful. At this moment, the little bald head found Suer. For him, although it was just a moment of inspiration, he still brandished his sword towards Wufeng Mountain under the guise of upholding righteousness and eliminating harm for the people. He was just a punching bag for his family. But they are the treasures of my sworn brothers. He still chose to summon over 100 martial artists from the alliance. Only then did he feel that it should be foolproof. With a stronghold of this scale, even if they all had the same skills as Old Man Liang, it would be impossible to withstand the encirclement of so many skilled fighters. Since Old Liang is in the stronghold, it's a different story. Upon learning that this stronghold has fewer than 30 people, he felt it would be easy to take. His position as the leader of this faction is not solely based on connections. Being cautious. This made him find it quite interesting. In recent months, they had also received multiple commissions from the government to suppress bandits. In his view. In any case, Jing Daomeng and Lu Lin are already at odds. Although he usually can't be bothered to think about such expeditions, the person seated heard this and couldn't help but feel delighted. He had long known that the two old fellows harbored resentment against him for taking their boss's position, but he never expected they would choose to ally with the Dear Spirit Alliance, especially with that little-known small gang. However, upon inquiry, he discovered that the current leader of the gang had not changed. What was originally a disastrous conspiracy for Tianyang turned into a farce. It concluded with Suer's silly laugh. After spring arrived, the village returned to its previous harmonious life of seeking the mountains. However, at this time, a report suddenly came from the Right Path Alliance's subordinates in Luoyang City. The two elders, who had been missing for several months, appeared in the Wufeng Mountain Road Ling Mountain Thieves group. The boy in front of him was definitely a monster. The old cripple's martial skills were no worse than his own. In the end, he was knocked unconscious by this guy with his bare hands, though he was unwilling in his heart. In a moment of desperation, he still chose to respectfully admit his mistake to the boss. Only then did he realize the other was quite cunning. Seeing there was only one left, he picked up his broad blade, ready for another round. Looking at the boy walking towards him slowly, old Murong was completely terrified by now. From when he fought Chongshan a few months ago, he had realized that the martial arts he learned in the Xuannu realm were quite advanced. At the moment, he didn't take the two of them seriously at all. Although in the end, he did beat these two old dogs, who called themselves the two of the three madmen, to the ground. But he was also wounded by the iron fan. Besides, we're all family here. There's a saying that swords and blades are blind. Spit flying everywhere. Xia Shuer ultimately decided to abandon her weapon. But now, he was completely different. They were indignant. Now it was too late to back down. One person suddenly had a clever idea. With a smile, he took out an iron fan. He told the kid that he didn't have a habit of using weapons. That shout cost him his front teeth. After that, the bald guy and the uncle were both carefully knocked unconscious by Suer. This scene left the two old men completely dumbfounded. The frustrated youth stared at them intently. In their eyes, Snow's arrogance felt like a nail driven into their chests. It just felt like some currency party army, sweating profusely, trying to boost his own courage. He had to yell at Suer a few times. But unsurprisingly, they realized that it seemed they had a bit of a problem being so isolated. In their evasion, they encouraged the young guy who came with them to take the lead. Initially, he wanted to back out, but was suddenly pushed out by someone. At that moment, the young man appeared formidable in his eyes. Not to cripple anyone, he coldly asked them, which dog wants to go first? The young man's rebirth ultimately showcased an unstoppable force. It frightened that so-called one of the three madmen, the old Murong, so much that his heart raced. Looking at the young man's aura, with no other choice, he had to bring Shuer out again. He announced that the ranking battles could start from the 7th and proceed in order. And at this moment, it was exactly what the little guy wanted. Shai slowly walked towards the open rooftop, almost in a trance. Although he kept reminding himself of third brother's warning not to cripple anyone, we'll still need someone to patrol the mountains. He doesn't want the young boy to become a fierce demon at such a young age. However, the provocation from those 5 old men during the ranking battle was just too much. This left Tianyang feeling quite frustrated. But he knew that a few of the old men were indeed very skilled in martial arts. If he hadn't encountered it himself, I'm afraid that the newcomers won't be able to enjoy the new year in one piece. He has completely changed from the rough demeanor he had while patrolling the mountains. He kindly reminds Suer to learn to find a balance. Once we get through this harsh winter. Suer immediately changed his expression. Noah replied softly. After learning about those guys' gossip and the little one's thoughts, third brother surprisingly appeared quite indifferent. He complained that eldest brother taught seventh brother how to throw a tantrum, furiously heading toward Shindai's cabin with a kitchen knife. It was just at that moment that he ran into his third brother, returning home from the palace. Seeing that the seventh brother seemed troubled, he called out to him. Hearing that it was third brother's voice, in what used to be a peaceful life, he truly didn't know. In Suer's eyes, no one could defame his brothers. Watching the boy, completely different from usual, without realizing it, he began to vent his frustrations at the simple boy beside him. But when Suer heard those people slandering his brothers, suddenly, ninth sister heard a loud crash. Turning around, he had split the entire table along with the cutting board in two out of anger, so she took the initiative to handle the cooking. From time to time, she would pull the easygoing Shuer in to help. But at that moment, he seemed particularly irritable. The village isn't big. He clearly heard the whispers of the newcomers. This makes them appear rather obscure. After the village suddenly increased from 10 to 25 people, The chores became even more burdensome. Although Jume now has a group of younger brothers, they are all rough men. After thinking it over, they plan to use the small stronghold as a springboard to advance further in the deer forest. After all, the rule in Lu Lin is that the strong are respected, especially since these few are already quite capable. It is only in recent years that Jing Daomeng has grown increasingly stronger. According to their observations, although the old seventh's martial arts are impressive, the rumors of him defeating Mu Donglai must be exaggerated. As for Pang Tianyang, he is even more superficial, clearly a person who looks strong but is weak inside. In the blink of an eye, winter has arrived. They had thought that, after so much hard work together, they could enjoy a warm spring. But the few who were already difficult to train began to stir restlessly. Secretly, they began plotting to force the village chief to reopen the ranking battles. After several patrols of the mountains, any passing merchant convoy, regardless of size, would inevitably suffer losses. Even the extremely strong Mu Donglai had fallen victim to them. Thus, some people, including them, came to seek their fortune. One by one, they respectfully paid their respects to the mountain. For a time, the entire village appeared to be thriving, both in scale and popularity. The desire to betray had long been ignited. However, there were very few wealthy families and green forest organizations in Luoyang. They had been unable to find a good opportunity. A few months ago, rumors suddenly spread that a powerful deer spirit stronghold had appeared out of nowhere on Wufeng Mountain. While mocking this makeshift leader for having flashy moves that don't match his merit, he boldly claims that today he will take over the position of the chief of Wufeng Mountain. Meanwhile, several old guys beside him show expressions of ridicule, as if they have already secured this mountain stronghold. They are just small officials from the Righteous Path Alliance, struggling to make a name for themselves. They knew their sword technique was just third-rate moves. Being able to demonstrate such destructive power with this was unexpected. It seems the problem lies with this old seventh. Only now do they realize that what they picked up is more than just an ordinary little beggar. The old man is coughing like a pig in front of the eldest brother. But because they are brothers, they soon cheered and rushed towards the bloodied one, eagerly asking the seventh brother to teach them this sword technique. The admiration from the little sister made the young boy extremely shy. Only Tianyang and the fourth brother fell silent. Each exorcism sword move is executed with extraordinary skill. In the end, the sword chi flew out, directly striking a tree several meters away. It pierced through. This scene scared his brothers even more than Mu did. How much lighter is winter? When everyone gathered at the back mountain, the little guy has already assumed the stance of the exorcism sword technique. But the aura he exudes is extremely fierce. Even his little sister can't help but cover her surprised mouth upon seeing it. But that's not all. He found it even more unbelievable. He then suggested that old seventh demonstrate the exorcism sword technique in front of everyone. Su didn't quite understand his older brother's intention, but he didn't see any problem with it either. So he gladly accepted his request. But what he didn't know was that the brothers who witnessed this scene were far more shocked than the meager gains from patrolling the mountains. After returning to the village, Tianyang couldn't help but pull Su aside and ask him if what he just used was really old fourth's exorcism sword technique. After getting a definite answer from the little guy, he expressed his willingness to hand over double the bandits. He only hoped that they wouldn't pursue their foolish actions. Upon seeing this, Su finally revealed a bright smile. The joy of finally being able to help his brothers made him extremely happy. A chill of terror surged in his heart. If that sword had carried the intent to kill, he would have already met his ancestors. Thinking this, he no longer cared about his pride. He immediately prostrated himself on the ground. It was only then that Mu Donglai barely reacted, realizing that the young man had just used the smallest movement to leave his attack range. And the power of that sword might just be the legendary sword steel. He felt the blood seeping from his neck. As he watched the young man approach, step by step, the courier didn't even have time to react. Tianyang and Old Four, who were about to rush forward to save someone, were also dumbfounded. At this moment, the subtle pressure radiating from Su'er caused the leaves in the valley to swirl in chaos. As Mu's longsword was about to strike Su'er, everyone held their breath. But then, they heard a loud bang. Mu Donglai's longsword had turned into scrap metal. This scene made them freeze for a moment. Tianyang and the fourth brother were completely panicked. Mu Donglai felt utterly mocked by the small figure sent over. Angered, he raised his long sword and charged at the young boy. This sudden attack from the opponent left the brothers in complete disarray. Is already ranked among the top 50 experts in the vast martial world, but in Tianyang's eyes, over these days, the opponent's swordsmanship didn't seem strong. He figured his brothers were just too lazy to make a move. However, everyone had different thoughts. Looking at the sudden surge of bloodlust from Lao Chi, Tian Yang couldn't feel the slightest joy this time. He knew the swordsman opposite them was not someone they could handle with just these few men. Although his estimation wasn't wrong, that Mu Dong lay across from him. Though he has the mind of a 6-year-old, he unexpectedly mastered the 9 heavens sword technique from the Xian NV mirror, but he has no idea how strong he has become now. Thanks to the careful care of his brothers in the mountain stronghold, Shuer has now learned to bare his fangs at outsiders, coldly muttering, "Uncle. You're in big trouble now. On Wufeng Mountain, no one can mock us." This is a young man filled with pure hostility, but it had many flaws. Such a person doesn't need the brothers to intervene. Since I'm here, of course, I should actively help them. So I walked alone towards that late winter. This is the first time bringing Lao Chi out to patrol the mountains and we run into tough opponents. I thought that if a fight broke out, Lao Si would have to protect him to escape. But at that moment, the young man suddenly appeared in front of everyone with a knife. In Suer's eyes, his swordsmanship was fast. They couldn't believe their eyes. This made his presence even more imposing. He taunted them again, saying they were not even worth being called trash. Watching his overpowering stance, but it could really make Tian Yang anxious. Being able to catch cold arrows with bare hands surely indicates a skilled fighter. Thinking of this, he immediately ordered his brothers to shoot arrows, but the other person simply dodged. With a swift sword in hand, he sliced down each arrow. This scene made them feel like they had seen a ghost. They demanded a toll of 50 taels from the merchant group to allow passage. Mu Donglai could only feel that these people were out of their minds. However, since they were thieves from Deer Forest, there was no reason to let them leave alive. Tian Yang also noticed that the other party seemed somewhat dissatisfied with Deer Forest's actions. He still sneered coldly, calling them despicable and shameless. Bandits are bandits. Just a bunch of scum, even worse than good-for-nothings. Looking at the group of people from Tianyang that appeared before him, they immediately stated the name of Deer Forest. They even spent a fortune to hire the well-known, supposedly top courier Mu Dong for protection. But just then, a sudden arrow attack came out of nowhere, aiming straight at the leader's knee. Luckily, Mu Uncle caught it in midair with his bare hands. Although it seemed the enemy only meant to intimidate. The next day, a caravan happened to pass through Wufeng Mountain. Although they had heard that only a few small bandits claimed the mountain, the caravan leader was deeply concerned because the goods being transported were extremely valuable. He couldn't sleep all night, for safety's sake. Naturally, he would put in all his effort to learn well, so as not to let them down. The fourth brother, eager to teach swordsmanship, noticed something else. In the past, even when the brothers begged him, he was unwilling to pass down these skills. It seems the fourth brother has grown much more affectionate towards Suer. "I will teach you my exorcism sword technique. At that time, it will be something extraordinary." In the eyes of the youth, he didn't understand whether the exorcism sword technique was truly powerful, but he knew that his brothers were genuinely good to him. You could easily get hurt by it. So in this competition, if both you and the eighth brother are using weapons, you might not win so easily. But you don't have to worry. And that he'd certainly need something like this to have more presence while patrolling the mountains. This made the little guy very happy. But then the fourth brother reminded him again. The blade saw is a very dangerous thing. If you can't concentrate. Fourth brother found him, and tossed a broadsword into his hands. He said that eldest brother had paid out of his own pocket to have it made for him at the city blacksmith. They all noticed that Su seemed to be more skilled with weapons. But to Tianyang, he doesn't care to figure out the reasons. He just looks at silly Suer with relief. Congratulations to him for keeping his position as seventh brother. By evening. But his brothers are still completely confused at this point. They didn't understand what just happened either. Each of them is wondering if Chongshan has some hidden ailment. Even if old seventh were in the marketplace, there's no reason he could knock out such a big opponent, right? I'm afraid the brothers would have to find someone else to join again. In just an instant, Zhongshan fainted. This scene, although unexpected for Suer, he knew he had won. However, he knows how hard won everything he has gained is now. Instinctively, he turns his fist into an ice blade, entwining true energy and sending it toward the opponent. Fortunately, he hasn't grasped the trick yet. Otherwise, with that punch, even a strong man would have to seek out a doctor for bruises. And how does such a small body look like it only suffered a bit of superficial injury? Yet even Suer himself is unaware of how great his power truly is now. But he doesn't understand how to utilize the true energy of the 9 heavens from the Xian New Mirror. Even wild animals understand the need to protect their food. How could a young man easily let others take away what is his? At this moment, Chongshan's heart was already filled with shock, surprise, and confusion. Just now, with how he smashed his fist like that, since Shuer had memory, he has lived like a sandbag. Though there seems to be no visible damage on the surface, there isn't a single good piece of skin left on him. He has finally experienced days where he is cared for. Let us stand until the end. The young man might be the only peerless master ever beaten into existence. He was pinned down by the samurai and hammered for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. But he climbed back up, carrying the battle. What he didn't know was, he finally stopped, breathing heavily. It seemed like everything was finally over. He was preparing to take Tian Yang's wife's position. But at that moment, an extremely gloomy voice suddenly came from behind him. I will never give up that position. Punch after punch landed on his body. This scene left Tian Yang completely stunned. Just now, his movement technique was so impressive. How did he suddenly end up getting beaten with no chance to fight back? After a while, Zhongshan was exhausted from hitting him. He could only clench his fists. He struck hard at Zhongshan's face. But the opponent was a soldier just returned from the army. This punch made him extremely angry. He immediately pressed him to the ground, only to realize he had no weapon in his hand. Besides practicing swordsmanship in the warehouse, I have hardly ever tried using my fists. His distorted martial arts style left him confused. He didn't even know how to respond. But coming up next, Zhongshan threw a punch straight at him. It made everyone's hearts jump to their throats. But at that moment, Schwer suddenly ducked down. He quickly got close and swung. How much it meant to him. He was determined not to let even the slightest bit be taken from him again. And this scene made Suer's older brothers especially happy to watch. In fact, they were very fond of the little guy. For the past 6 months, you could say he worked tirelessly, confronting Zhongshan. It was only then that the brothers realized. The little guy's eyes were shining with a battle they'd never seen before. What they didn't know was, just how important all of this was to Suer. After spending over half a year in the stronghold. But at this moment, Schwer fell silent. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. He silently clenched his fists, and slowly walked toward the open ground. He immediately proposed a challenge, to determine who will be ranked 7th. Tian Yang found this talk rather amusing, but he didn't stop him. He also wanted to see if the little guy had developed some backbone. Now he has some subordinates too. In the bandit camp, rank is based on when you joined. So from now on, Schwer can go patrolling with them. However, this remark greatly displeased the newcomer, Zhongshan. He didn't want to become the subordinate of a little kid. Some came to earn money and support their families. Some had committed crimes. And there were also girls who escaped after being sold to brothels. It seems this village has truly become a melting pot in the green woods. Suddenly, the 4th brother pressed Suer's head and said congratulations to the youngest. In his spare time, he would go to the back mountain to practice his sword. Suer is simple-minded. I just hope that one day I can help my brothers. Another month passed. Among the brothers, the sergeants found 3 strong men who came to join them. So, while they were looking for more people to join them, they also began to patrol the mountains more actively. However, they still didn't bring Schwer along. During these days, the boy here became more and more adept at his work. It'll be whatever the 2 brothers say it was. The brothers, when they came to their senses, only felt the village roads had widened. That night, they had a wild drinking spree with the others. Meanwhile, Suer looked at them, so happy. He himself seemed particularly cheerful. They would strike to kill. To avoid being discovered by Lu Lin and getting themselves in trouble. I figure in less than 2 months, their little shabby village will cease to exist. By the time the higher-ups investigate, they won't know what the scale of this village once was. But the 2 men's intentions were even more sinister. They knew that if it were ordinary thieves, the large merchant caravan would at most give them a lesson. But if they were mountain bandits from Lu Lin, after thinking it over, they had no choice but to gather 10 people quickly, even if it meant joining. Lu Lin Alliance was surprised to enter the most powerful faction in the martial world so easily. Tian Yang couldn't react in time. The organization has grown larger. Performance evaluations even emerged during that time. The number of fakes they have is extremely limited. If the boss finds fault with them, I'm afraid they might lose an arm or a leg. And for the more formidable enemies, Lu Lin wouldn't wipe out entire families just for a few underlings. That would lead to an all-out war with the Alliance of the Righteous, which wouldn't be worth it. But only leaders like them can see these things clearly. Cadres have finally come to inspect the situation of this small stronghold. They discovered that there were only 6 strong men and a young boy. Losing blood made him especially disappointed, though the injured teams near Luoyang City are particularly tough. So much so that there are almost no bandits in the surrounding hills of Wufeng Mountain. They will obediently offer a huge sum to avoid retaliation. That could lead to their extermination. Such a reputation has long been admired by Brother Tian Yang and his fellows. And this time, this made Lu Ling unprecedentedly powerful. Its strength faintly surpassed that of the Righteous Alliance. and it said that bandits who joined them could rob without spilling a drop of blood. Whenever the merchants hear about the Green Forest people, the righteous alliance's repeated attempts to subdue them failed every time. Soon, people began to call him the sky-breaking demon lord. He became the top master among the top 10 in the martial world rankings. Even remnants of the demon sect came seeking him by name. All of them were absorbed by Lu Ling. Meanwhile, a monstrous man suddenly appeared. He called himself the Blade of Lulin. With his strength alone, he nearly unified all the mountain bandits. Yet despite his power, and it is rumored that they are the crocodiles of bandits, just their name alone can strike fear into people's hearts. Ever since the Moon Demon died, the entire martial world was dominated by the Righteous Alliance, composed of 7 major sects and 2 great clans. At this time, the followers of the demon sect could find no place to settle or survive. They say they occupy the mountains as kings, but every time they patrol the mountains, they only collect a bit of toll from the caravans. Even so, they are often bullied by the caravan guards. As a result, they are now so poor that they can hardly make ends meet. In desperation, they sought help from the officials of the Deer Spirit Alliance. The young man was tricked into a den of thieves, yet appeared quite satisfied, and the gathering consisted merely of a bunch of ordinary folks with no choice. Their martial arts skills are not high, but they are relatively sturdy. Felt true satisfaction for the first time in his life only after becoming a bandit. Until one day, suddenly, 2 very imposing individuals arrived. It's unclear why. It made this group of bold brothers kneel in greeting. He learned many things he had never known before, including how to cook a big pot of food without leaving 7 people hungry. But he often worried about his brothers, who frequently came back beaten up. Su'er was very concerned about them. Isn't it ironic? This young master of a noble family, he didn't think much of it. He just felt that the youth was full of energy, a good candidate for a handyman. If he performed well, he could also teach him some martial arts for self-defense. From that point on, Su'er started a new life in this mountain stronghold. But it was just such a simple phrase. In the heart of the youth, it felt as if he was about to shatter the grievances he had endured for many years. Imitating others, he picked up some crude words. His shout echoed through the entire Wufeng mountain, scattering the birds and beasts. Although Tianyang was surprised, now all that's left is to shout the slogans loudly. He shouted towards the mountain with all his might. A crude phrase escaped his lips. Then he followed up with, "We are the best." Finally, he had the little guy shout it back with him. He even asked the kid if he thought they were cool. Although their real intention was just to make Su'er stay and run errands, only the boy himself knew. Such encouragement is invaluable to oneself. And Pang Tianyang found that brainwashing was going smoothly. The bandit leader finally showed a joyful expression. Next, he started promoting himself to him, saying things like, "We are the rulers of Wufeng Mountain, and no one can defy us here." In short, just a lot of boasting. Or perhaps the boy prefers to be a coward who gets robbed. These words struck directly at Su'er's heart. He lowered his head, gritting his teeth and shaking his head fiercely. Seeing this scene, this made the rough man feel irritable, but his way of handling it was relatively harsh. Just clearly tell Su'er that joining the gang can bring freedom, and he won't go hungry. He just quietly watched him. From the boy's cowardly behavior, he finally understood what was wrong. The little guy shouldn't be stupid, but rather one of those children who grew up being abused. They are starting to get a headache, longing for such small things. Their big brother, Pang Tianyang, seems to suddenly have an idea. He grabs Su'er and drags her outside. He casually threw it by the cliff and said nothing. He didn't dare to eat the buns they roasted. The reason given is that he has nothing. He can't afford the meal. Seeing the boy looking foolish, he doesn't seem like someone who can cook. And bandits on this mountain. But in their eyes, since the boy was a beggar, a little food should make him grateful. However, even though his stomach had been growling for a long time, they didn't care whether the little one understood or not, and just went on with their introductions. After making a fuss for a while, Su'er only understood that these 6 were sworn brothers. I found myself in this wooden cabin. From their mouths, I learned that this was their stronghold, and they were the bandits of Wufeng Mountain, the free and bold heroes of the Green Forest. It seemed like the person was alive. They sighed, saying they had never seen anyone worse off than themselves. Judging by his appearance, the little guy was probably a beggar. They figured it wouldn't hurt to bring him back to the village to do some chores. It might even count as a good deed. When he opened his eyes again, in his daze, he couldn't make out what the 2 people were saying, and the 2 of them were even more frustrated than Su'er at that moment. Early in the morning, they came across a dead body. They immediately cursed their bad luck, but after taking a closer look, all he threw up was sour bile. It was then that he realized the mushrooms must have been poisonous. In no time, he lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. He didn't know how much time had passed, but luckily, the first to find him wasn't a wild beast. Then, because of hunger, he mistakenly ate a beautiful mushroom. As soon as night fell, he began to feel dizzy and weak. His limbs grew limp. His stomach churned as if it were on fire. Who are they? Why am I here? For a boy whose mind is still at the age of 6, his feelings at this moment could be described as terror. He only remembers fleeing from Luoyang City into the deep mountains. And this time, the boy they picked up seemed to receive extra care from them. But in Su-er's eyes, these people all look fierce and intimidating. Their minds are also in a fog. Although they act like robbers and looters, they only take the bare minimum. They never take everything. Instead, they are often beaten up by passing merchant caravans. As a result, most of the time they can only survive by hunting in the wild. Only then did Su-er realize she had been overthinking. After leaving, the old man still couldn't believe his eyes. Is it really possible for a person to hold up a city gate? This is probably the most principled group of bandits I've ever seen. The young man turned around and managed to stop the falling city gate. With an apologetic look, he said he hoped not to be caught. But the man was utterly confused. Realizing the other wasn't trying to catch him, just wanted to know why he ran away when he saw him. But the man was still hot on his heels. Just as Su-er dashed through the city gate, he chased after him too. But the heavy iron falling from above made him realize he might have chased too eagerly. Just when there was no way to avoid it, the two of them raced against each other in the urgent situation. Su-er realized the opponent's agility was exceptional. Even after running all night, he couldn't shake him off completely. At this moment, seeing the city gates about to close at dusk, it was as if he saw a glimmer of hope for escape. This made the man even more alert. He felt that seeing someone from Wulong Villa so scared might mean he had committed a serious crime. He didn't care whether he wanted to remember or not. He chased after him. 10 years had passed. The man only felt that the little kid looked especially familiar. He thought about asking about his background, but Su-er had no idea what he was thinking. Feeling guilty, he turned and ran. But after seeing the man's face, he realized it was the swordsman who had personally locked him in the warehouse back then. Instantly terrified, he immediately lowered his head. He definitely didn't want to be caught again. Just as Zheng Yu was about to leave, the man suddenly called out to him. At that moment, Su-er was on the street where Xiaoye had once led him. Looking at how different it was from his memories, he finally realized that he had been in the warehouse for too long. Lost in thought, he accidentally bumped into an older man. He quickly apologized in a hurry. Hearing senior sister's voice gradually fading away, Yuan felt deeply conflicted. She had been very happy during her 10 years with the Nangong family. There, she didn't experience the schemes and intrigues like in the Lu family. He truly didn't want his relationship with his master and senior sister to end like this. I more or less understand his stance. My elder brother and I will set off immediately to report to father. As for the relationship between the Nangong family and the Lu family, it should no longer exist. Take care, junior brother. Xiao Yi finally spoke up, even though this was the most secluded spot in Wulong Villa. But there are so many guards. Is there something I shouldn't be seeing? Seeing all this, Zhong was unable to rest easy. He rushed over here, only to be surprised that his senior sister had already arrived. After sensing Yuan's presence, he didn't have much affection for this half-brother. But if the senior sister he had always admired found out, he feared that at this moment, Bai Yujingzhong simply informed Yuan of the specific situation. Upon learning that Su-er had been imprisoned in the old warehouse, left no room for even the slightest deception in front of her. Thinking of this, Yuan felt a tightness in his heart. He worried whether his mother had taken action against his younger brother. For him, but Yuan beside him wasn't foolish. He knew his mother's methods with his younger brother, and he was well aware of how formidable this junior sister, younger than him, truly was. She was even more suited for the title of Qing Pian than the senior brother. Her meticulous mind looks brand new. This makes Xiaoye completely disbelieve her words. She turns and leaves. Seeing that Xiao Bei didn't take him seriously, a long-suppressed sense of frustration and shame surged in his heart. Yet, she says nothing. At this moment, although Bai Yujin is the head of the manor, her fear of the Nangong family runs deep. With a forced smile, she tries to obscure the truth. But everything in Su'er's room, bedding, furniture. It was hard to imagine why, despite being descendants of prominent families, he could have such a fate. It wasn't until Yuan asked his mother about Su'er's situation, that he felt something was amiss. He stood behind the two, incredibly grim, yet possesses keen insight into human nature. Though born into a noble family from a young age, yet due to the encounter with Su'er 10 years ago, The young boy's small frame was covered in astonishing scars. He felt an inexplicable heaviness in his heart. He doesn't understand the ways of survival. Soon he'll face hunger and sickness. Then, all that's left is to wait for him to prey on the wild. And all will be well. The young girl has flawless skin. The squad leader quickly expressed his intention to personally lead a team to pursue. However, Byujin unexpectedly didn't feel gloomy. He thought that perhaps this was better. A little waste with a mind stuck at 6 years old. Now he's just grown a bit bigger, that's all. It was caused by last night's thunderstorm. He also can't figure it out. That little brat doesn't know any martial arts. How did he manage to climb up there? Upon seeing this scene, he didn't have time to return home to entertain the Nangong family. Instead, he brought his men to the warehouse. He angrily smashed open the door. What met his eyes was a complete mess. He immediately spotted the damage to the roof. If they discovered that little bastard was being held captive, he feared that Nangong who had been feudal for many years, would be the first to take his life. However, the guard's panic made him feel uneasy. Upon learning that the little brat escaped the warehouse last night, he became furious. Although he appeared kind-hearted, he was well aware of the girl's intentions. Taking advantage of the crowd entering the residence, he immediately instructed the guards to never allow anyone from the Nangong family to approach the warehouse. She seemed to turn a deaf ear. Although the elder brother scolded the younger sister for her lack of manners, he too simply walked straight into the inner courtyard alone. This scene left everyone perplexed. But Bai Yu was quite skilled. Xiao Yan was not included, though she has now grown even more refined and delicate. But since she came here, she has been searching everywhere for that frail figure from 10 years ago. Even when faced with Byujin's greetings, Byujin made sure to compliment the young master of the Nangong family. I've heard that nephew Qin Tian is now a renowned swordsman known throughout the martial world. He glanced at the woman beside him with open admiration. For a moment, it seemed as if everyone was harmonious and friendly. But among them, this has allowed Wulong Villa to maintain its former prestige. Meanwhile, there is no longer a scene within the villa. After a long separation, they seem exceptionally cheerful. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the next day, Lu Yuan, who had been studying at the Nangong family, completed his 10-year training. Finally, they have returned to Wulong Villa. The siblings of the Nangong family also came along due to their hereditary ties. At this time, Suer's elder brother already appeared exceptionally outstanding. Over the past 10 years, Byujin has been working tirelessly. Although he knew it was his way of saying goodbye, his heart still surged with mixed emotions. Standing on the rooftop, looking at the familiar yet strange city of Luoyang, he seemed to have finally made up his mind. Slowly, he rose to his feet, no longer weak. When Suer regained his senses, he turned back, intending to share his joy with the only friend he's had in the past 10 years. But by then, the mirror had already shown no one, as if that guy had never existed at all. Watching him slowly climb onto the roof, the person in the mirror knew it was time to part with the little one. His body gradually disappeared into the mirror, replaced by a faceless figure. As if offering blessings to the boy from within the mirror, pointing to the dome of this warehouse, this person can now leave. Looking at the sunlight he hadn't seen in 10 years, he stood still for a long time, and before he knew it, he leaped onto the pile of clutter in the room. He hasn't completely lost his ability to speak. His experiences, however, are frozen at the age of 6. As he successfully mastered the final move of the Nine Heavens sword technique, the little figure in the mirror seemed exceptionally joyful, but it also became increasingly illusory. The youth has been apart for 10 years, seeing the light of day again. Though he is already a peerless sword god, he appears particularly lost, because he has been with the mirror image. Time flies. In a nearly completely isolated and undisturbed environment, 10 years passed in a flash. The 16-year-old Suer finally let out a long sigh of relief. Finally, I am exactly like you. Seemed to come alive, drilling into my mind. Even the Nine Heavens sword technique, which his father never obtained, was now imprinted in the mind of this 6-year-old boy. A child who was originally destined to die in this warehouse, had his fate completely changed. I plan to cover this strange mirror again, but the person in the mirror seems to have something to say to me. Helplessly, I lift the cover once more. However, this little fellow instantly freezes in place. The dense text in the mirror and that eye-catching Nine Heavens sword. The little guy began to realize he didn't have a compelling reason to learn, and the things he was learning were becoming increasingly difficult. The physical exhaustion was getting greater. The more I practice, the hungrier I get. I am still unsatisfied. I couldn't help but pick up the stick and started learning from him again. But this time, the difficulty was quite high. Schwer spent several days without being able to master it. Just one move, plus the various taunts from the scheming mirror person. But for the little guy, Successfully dispelling the cold of this harsh winter is already enough. Even though he feels the movements of the person in the mirror are incredibly cool, he no longer has the desire to continue practicing. Gradually, the sword techniques he performs become increasingly mysterious. To him, what was this? He had personally taught him for nearly 10 days. With just this little bit, he has nearly completed the outburst of true energy. Although he feels no real sense of oppression through the mirror, the momentum that rises without wind deeply shocks Suer. The little one could feel a very comfortable stream of energy spiraling within his body. At this moment, Suer still didn't realize that this stream of energy was true chi, something cultivated over time by masters possessing inner strength. But this sight infuriated the figure in the mirror. This made him smile in satisfaction. Although the little guy was angry, he could sense that he was gradually emerging from the cold. He felt himself slowly escaping from the cold state. In less than the time of one shumu, the figure in the mirror revealed an unabashed disdain. The little chicken stood on one leg and never moved again. Sure enough, Suer lost his balance. He fell face first to the ground. But the more he looked, the more alarmed he became. His movements were almost identical to the Nine Heavens sword technique practiced by his elder brother. Only his performance was even more extraordinary. Unable to resist, he picked up a stick and began to imitate him. When he realized the little guy had almost no martial arts foundation, he looked up. He felt that his movements were quite strange, like a startled swan, like a wandering dragon. It caused his gaze to be deeply fixed on the figure in the mirror. Looking at the little guy curled up in the corner, Zur stood silently in the mirror for a long time. Finally, he let out a soft sigh. He picked up a nearby stick and began to dance in front of him as if performing. Zur was drawn in by this scene. Leave him with no energy to fear this strange thing. Although he was indeed startled when he first saw it, he realizes that no matter how the reflection in the mirror frightens him, there is no way for him to walk out of it. So he is no longer as terrified as he was initially. The food delivered each day is getting less and less. The guards are all calculating when they can collect the body of the former young master. At this moment, Suer is indeed gradually losing consciousness. The drafty warehouse and thin clothing, combined with a body weakened by hunger, with a serene expression. This is a dark-hearted mirror that bullies children. It has a wise name, Nine Heavens Mysterious Maiden. And winter has come. The little guy has been locked in the warehouse for more than half a year. Though he didn't expect such a thing would be left behind by Auntie, he didn't think too much of it. Rolling up his sleeves, he decided to give this rare item a wipe. But the more he wiped, the stranger it felt. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror smiled at him. That day, he still stared at the rock-hard bun in his hand. Recalling the magical delicacies Xiao Yi once took him to eat, he suddenly noticed a spot in the corner of the warehouse glowing. Driven by curiosity, he discovered a dusty mirror there. Ordered the mercenaries to throw everything related to the old man into the warehouse. He didn't forget to remind even that little brat. And Suer's fate was once again manipulated by others. He lived in the Lu family's warehouse, surviving on a hard steamed bun and a bowl of murky water every day. This made him extremely furious. Unable to obtain the sword manual, and with the attention of the Nangong family, he could never sit still at ease. In a fit of anger, the head of the Lu family, apprenticed to Nangong Hu. From then on, Bai Yujin completely took control of Wulong Manor, confirming the Lu family's prominence to the world. But when he searched through the master's belongings, he couldn't find the manual for the Nine Heavens sword technique no matter what. Frost month of the same year, the legendary swordmaster Lu Murong never woke up from his sleep again. Meanwhile, Bai Yujin brought 20 death guards from the Bai family, each assigned to protect Wulong Manor. At the same time, the eldest son, Lu Yuan, was sent to the Nangong family. As he got closer, Suer's older brother also saw Nangong Yi, cold and pure, with her delicate beauty. But after all, he is still just a child. He couldn't describe the sudden panic in his heart. Spring comes, autumn goes. Just as she was about to ask something out of confusion, Xiao Yi and Suer's older brothers arrived as well. From a distance, the anxious voice of Nangong Ye's older brother could be heard. What are you doing? I've been looking everywhere for you. I thought you went to climb the roof again. In an instant, Xiao Yi seemed to understand everything. A pure and intense malice emanated from him. He stared at him fiercely. This scene made Bai Yujin's heart skipped a beat. By the time they returned, it was already late at night. Both mothers looked extremely worried about the two children. But when Bai Yujin showed concern for Suer, her body couldn't stop trembling. This was clearly felt by Nangong Yi, who was holding her hand. He won't forget it. It's like a dream. Following Xiao Yi through the market, she tried many foods she had never eaten before. But dreams eventually come to an end. The guards from the villa found them. I could only buy him some good food. And although Suer is from a prestigious family, It was his first time eating hot skewers. For him, this taste has been engraved in his mind. Since childhood, he has been exceptionally talented. His martial arts skills have advanced rapidly, but with Su'er, I felt helpless for the first time. Although I secretly took him out of Wulong Villa, and has been tormenting that child all these years, the one who discovered all this, was the eldest daughter of the Nangong family. Xiao Yi has seen too much suffering in that young boy, even though she's born of noble blood. For a moment, I feel a mix of emotions. In the end, all I can say is to get better soon, whether it's for your soldiers or your child. But how could they know? Bai Yujin was consumed by jealousy and hatred. This situation is truly unacceptable. A legendary figure in the martial world, yet he is the most incompetent father. Just looking at his current state, I can't really blame him. For 6 years, I haven't dared to visit him. Once, Nangong who looked at his once spirited younger brother. He never imagined that after the battle with the moon demon, the injuries would be this severe. To put it bluntly, my soul left with her. And he left behind a child who looks exactly like me, but I really don't have the courage to face him. Even though I know Ninger's death wasn't his fault, I still feel like I would resent him. He immediately went forward to check on the situation. But why has Su'er's father ignored him for 6 years? And why is he unwilling to pass down the 9 Heavens sword technique? In his final moments, the father revealed his true feelings to his sworn brother. On the day Ninger left, things that could only be revealed when the two of them were alone. But before the blood brother could agree to the request, Lu Murong suddenly started coughing violently. He collapsed onto the table. This scene shocked Nangong Hu greatly. That's quite a stretch. He looked over at his old friend of many years, Lu Murong. He didn't expect what he meant to be even more outrageous. He actually hoped that his children could be looked after by his elder brother. Moreover, there were some secret matters. Sending his eldest son to him as an apprentice. This greatly surprised Nangong Hu. In his opinion, the Lu family's 9 Heavens swordsmanship is no weaker than the Nangong family's martial arts. As for becoming an apprentice, he also left behind a hidden ailment. As the moon demon perished, it shattered into 9 sword energies, scattered throughout the martial world. But at this moment, Bai Yujin suddenly proposed. Elder brother Nangong Hu is exhausting his combat power alone. In a moment of crisis, younger brother Lu Murong arrives. His 9 Heavens sword technique strikes with insane ferocity, though he slayed the moon demon. On the other side, the 2 current sword gods were drinking heavily in the hall with their wives. The ladies only then learned that the moon demon had achieved mastery in their dark arts, already surpassed the limits of mortals. The 2 small figures walked all the way to a dog hole. Looking at Xiao Yi who had darted straight out, Su'er seemed even more frightened at that moment. In a daze, Xiao Ye's hand reached in from outside the hole. It's okay, the 2 small figures stood there for a long time, until Shuer could no longer cry. The rumbling sound from his stomach made Xiao Yi stand up, signaling Shuer to follow him, to take him to eat something delicious. Looking at such a pitiable child, Nangong Yi let out a soft sigh, and held him close, as if responding to his apologies. He murmured, "It's okay. Such pure care is something Su'er has never felt since birth. Warmth is just a fleeting moment. The grievances of 6 years can no longer be contained." It made him cry like a child. "What is your name?" After receiving Su'er's reply, he gently reassured the boy, "Don't be afraid, I will protect you." But what Xiao Yi didn't know was, recalling all that had happened, he didn't dare stop uttering, "I'm sorry." But he never imagined that the other person had only placed a hand on his head. A voice like a silver bell entered his ears, but a surge of irritation welled up inside him. He crouched down, intending to brush the dust off the boy. Yet that effortless flick earlier, which left him powerless, made Xiao Ye's actions even more frightening. Meanwhile, the little guy's dry mouth was continuously uttering apologies. The sunset cast a glow on the 2 of them, leaving Xiao Yi in silence for a long time. He had no idea what the boy had been through, left Xiao Yi feeling confused. With a soft leap, he caught hold of Shuer's collar, and slammed it hard against the ground, revealing the astonishing number of scars on his young body. If the old lady knew he had interacted with someone from the Nangong family, he felt a tightening in his heart at the thought. He took a deep breath, and suddenly wanted to flee. But this situation, in Su'er's eyes, was like a heavenly god about to unleash divine punishment. Thinking back to the Nangong family's visit to Wulong Manor, he knew that the girl he had never seen before was probably the esteemed guest mentioned by the old lady. Living in fear and despair, Su'er Zhongshe burst into tears. This scene left the usually calm and composed Nangong Yi at a loss. But he didn't know that his appearance had such a tremendous impact on this little guy. And his face, pure as a flower beyond the clouds. "I'm sorry I didn't But before he could finish his sentence, as he gradually regained his social awareness, he suddenly realized that the person was a girl who seemed to be about his age. In his eyes, the girl looked as delicate as a fairy. He was lost in thought for a long time. But by then, the person was already in front of him. He struggled to open his eyes. He can no longer see who the figure is. But the intense fear gave him an unexpected strength to kneel again. He hoarsely shouted, "I'm sorry." Zhong lost his last bit of strength, and collapsed to the ground. Shortly after, he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He kept shouting in his mind that he had to move. If the madam found out, he feared. He could no longer remember how many times this had happened. All he felt at that moment was tired, hungry, and drowsy. But he was only 6 years old. He truly dared not to defy the oppressive authority of that noble lady. Struggling to hold on, he still shows a rare joy in front of his sworn brother. After the two families exchanged pleasantries, they learned that the Nangong family had a 7-year-old girl visiting this time. However, she couldn't stand the tedious journey. As soon as they arrived at the gate, she ran off to explore by herself. At this moment, Su'er was enduring punishment alone by the wall of the courtyard, as per the matriarch's usual demands. No matter how high he rises, he is just a young master from a prestigious family. He obediently follows his mother's arrangements like that foolish younger brother. He brought them to Baiyujin. He brought the 3 siblings outside the mansion. Although the master appears withered, his mother insisted that he must be polite, friendly, and enthusiastic. He also understood that this was his mother's hope to connect the two families through marriage. But he doesn't have much choice now. Father did not pass down the Jiutian sword technique, and this younger brother also lost his mother. He really didn't know how to judge what was right and wrong. He early on displayed an unusual calmness and numbness. And when facing the visit from the Nan family, who were also sword masters, "Get out of here quickly." The eldest son of the old woman Baiyujin looked at his half-brother. His eyes were full of complexity. His own mother indeed lived a very repressed life because of him. He definitely wouldn't disgrace sword god Lu Jia. He looked at the boy, who still seemed somewhat sensible. The old woman stared for a long time, not understanding the deeper meaning. She casually threw away the towel used to wipe the blood. She urged him to hurry up and clean it up. He sternly asked if he knew what he should do. Meanwhile, the child on the ground coughed up blood. While trying to get back up, he said he would stay far away. He definitely wouldn't let his filthy appearance be seen by the guests. This news made the lady exceptionally gloomy. In her eyes, no matter how much she does, it is still far less than what a brother of the master can achieve. A visit after 6 years. Thinking of this, he looked at Su'er with even colder, icy eyes, leaving him with only the ability to eat. These past 6 years have been almost like living as a beast. At this moment, a servant brought news. He said the head of the Nangong family has arrived outside the residence, and the master, who hadn't left his room for 6 years, is now welcoming him outside. He locked himself in his wife's room for a full 6 years. Although his aunt was the legitimate wife of Mei Yen, she tried every means to help him step out of the shadows, but to no avail. From then on, Su'er became the shadow of his resentment. Meanwhile, his father was fighting alongside a close friend to defeat a demon threatening the martial world. Though they became legends in the martial world at that time, his father returned only to find his deep feelings for his wife make it impossible for him to let go the child, but treated worse than livestock. The old lady's beatings and scoldings were all too common for him, and the blood on her hands was always his. 6 years ago, on the day he was born, his mother passed away.